Welcome to Quarantine Cooking at Home with me. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make chicken broth. Keep watching. If we're just meeting, I'm Denise Jordan, and I teach traditional homemaking for today's homemaker. So if you want to learn more about the art and science of homemaking, subscribe and double tap that little bell icon so you don't miss any upcoming videos. So in this episode of Quarantine Cooking at Home with me, I decided to make chicken broth, and I am really trying to work towards a no waste kitchen. So over the past few months, when I have made chicken, I put the leftover chicken parts in here. So if we had roasted chicken, I would put the carcass in here. If we had fried chicken or whatever, I would take the bones, wash them off, and put the bones in here. And then of course, when I made soups or stews or chilies, and I would use carrots, and I would scrape the carrots instead of scraping the carrots into the sink and then washing it down the dishwasher disposal. I have been saving those carrot scrapings in a freezer bag, as well as my onion peels and all that kind of thing. So I have got quite a few, or I should say quite a bit of vegetable scrapings and chicken parts to make this chicken broth. And the other thing about making chicken broth is one of those things, or shall I say foods, drinks, beverages, whatever you want to call it, but it's one of those concoctions that you can use to clean out your refrigerator. So I've got these lettuce leaves in the fridge that are probably less than stellar, so I'm going to drop them in the pot. I've got this celery here that's past its prime, so it's going to go in the pot. 2 whole carrots, a whole onion, as well as some leaves from leeks that I use for another recipe. I've got a teaspoon of black peppercorns, about a teaspoon of ground ginger. Now I'm using ground ginger because I don't have any more fresh ginger in the fridge. I've used all of that up, and the last time I made chicken broth, I put some of the fresh ginger in it, and it had such a nice flavor. So I thought I'm going to go with the ground ginger today and see if it comes out as nice. And then of course I'm going to put in a couple of bay leaves. So how are we putting this together? I'm going to make it today in my stock pot. We are kicking it old school, and I'm cooking it on top of a stove. Now I have made either chicken broth or turkey broth in my Instant Pot and also in my slow cooker. And in case you missed those videos, I will link them above with an iCard and then in the description box below. So I thought today that we would just do things the old-fashioned way on top of the stove in my stock pot. And then the other ingredient that we will use, which I don't have here just yet, is water. And so what I'll do is I'll put my ingredients here in the pot, and then I'll add water just to cover, and then I'll set it on the stove, and then I will bring it to a boil, and I'll let it boil for about 30 minutes so I can skim off all the impurities that rise to the top. And then I'll turn the heat down, and I'll let it cook low and slow for about 6 hours. So let's get that started. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get my chicken and my scraps out of this container, and I'm just going to just stuff it right down here in this stock pot. I had this container so full nothing else would go in. Going to break those pieces up a little bit because they have been frozen, and there's quite a few carrot pieces and chicken bones and that kind of thing in here. Goes my ice maker. Just dropping these all right down here in this pot. So now why am I adding in all of these leftover scraps? The scraps of lemons and oranges and onion and carrot and celery. Well, first of all, the scrapings from the carrots are very nutritious. You know, we wash those carrots real good and we scrape all those off when we use them in other vegetables, but we're scraping away a lot of the nutrition. So to just give the carrots a good scrub and then use the scrapings in here actually adds quite a bit of nutrients to the chicken broth. Now, some people like to drink broth. They have maybe a cup of broth every morning, and it's very nutritious because it's got lots of minerals and vitamins and that kind of thing in it. We don't. I use the broth strictly for cooking. I use it for soups and stews and things like that. But I've kind of thought every now and then maybe I ought to try the healthful benefit of drinking some broth every morning. We'll see if that happens. And this onion that I'm using is less than stellar. So I'll cut off any bad parts. We also want to keep the onion skins because there's lots of nutrients in those as well. And they can also give some really good color. Already given the carrots a good scrub. So I'm just going to cut them up into large pieces. And I'm just going to cut this lettuce up. So when you're cleaning out your fridge and you're adding in the vegetables that you might have left over in your fridge, I want to caution you, there are certain vegetables that you don't want to add. Things like broccoli, those kind of hard stem vegetables, you don't want to put those in because they add kind of an odd flavor to your broth. But lettuce, that kind of thing works out just fine. So now let's add my teaspoon of black peppercorns. Gonna put in a couple of bay leaves. I think I put in 3. I think one flipped in there by itself. And then I've got just a teaspoon of ground ginger. And I think I've got enough veggies in there. I'm going to save this one for another time because this pot's pretty full. So I'm going to save this one for another stock making. Now the last thing I need to add in is 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar. I don't have apple cider vinegar, but I did find that I could sub out balsamic vinegar for that. So I'm going to use the balsamic vinegar instead of the apple cider. Now here's the thing. I know that the dark color of the balsamic vinegar is probably going to transfer itself to my broth. Well, it's going to be a slightly little bit darker than it normally would. But then again, the color is going to be a little bit different than it normally is because of all the different veggie scraps that I've got in here as well. So, and from what I understand, you need the acidic acid from the vinegar to do something to break down the bones and the marrow and all that kind of thing. So there's that. So let me bring you over and let you see what it looks like inside the pot. And then I'm going to add water. And as I said earlier, I'm going to add water just to cover. Then I'll set it on the stove, bring it to a boil, let it boil for about 30 minutes. And as it boils, I will skim off the impurities that rise to the top. Then I'll turn it down and then just let it simmer for about 6 hours. And from what I understand, with the chicken broth, about 6 or 7 hours should be enough to extract all the flavor. So here's my pot full of chicken pieces and vegetable scraps. I probably got the carcass of 2.5 to 3 chickens in here and lots and lots and lots of vegetable scraps. And I'm just going to add water to cover. Now here's the thing, it's better to have less water than too much water because too much water won't allow your chicken broth to gel nicely like it should, and also it'll give you a thinner broth. So just about there. I need to grab a little bit more. Okay, so here's what it looks like with my water added, and you can see there's some of the veggies and a few of the chicken bones are just floating a little bit on top of the water, but I think that's as good as it's going to get. All right, let's get this on the stove. This puppy was heavy. It's okay. I'm gonna let it do its thing and I'll come back in a little bit. So there you can see what it looks like with all the chicken carcass, the veggies, and the fruit. Now this broth is going to taste absolutely delicious. I made a broth at Thanksgiving time very similar to this, only it was my turkey bone broth. And I used a lot of leftover oranges and apples and lemons. And the broth was absolutely delicious. And I will admit I did do a little bit of sipping on that. But for the most part, I used it to make either gravy or dressing, or I used it for soups and that kind of thing, or in cooking, and it was amazing. So I'm really looking forward to good flavor on this one because I've got even more vegetable scraps as well as my fruit scraps and that kind of thing. And if you're wondering why I put in the fruit scraps, the citrus fruits really add such a nice flavor to the broth. Oh, and a good reason to wear an apron is so that you don't get splatter on your clothing. I don't know if you can see this, but while I was stirring, just to kind of make sure that all the pieces were broken up, because some of the chicken parts were still a little frozen and splattered, and I ended up with broth all over the front of my apron. But luckily it's not on the front of my shirt. And it's starting to bubble. The impurities are starting to rise to the top, and so I'll be skimming those off. But while I'm waiting to do that, let me just remind you that this video is part of the Quarantine Cooking at Home with Me collaboration hosted by the ladies of the Sister Circle, which includes This and That with Denise Jordan, Kenya's Decor Corner, and many more. I will link the names of the ladies that are participating in the collaboration in the description box below, and there will be a playlist, so you will definitely want to check out all of the amazing recipes, the selections that the ladies have to show you this week. And if you missed last week's episode of Quarantine Cooking at Home with Me, be sure and check that out. I will link that playlist below as well. And in case you're wondering about the Quarantine Cooking at Home with Me, one of the things that we are doing is sharing with all of you what we are cooking in our kitchen, how we're sorting things out. And I know for me today, for the bone broth, I only had 2 onions left, so I only used 1 onion in this particular recipe. Otherwise, I might have used 2, but since I've only got 1 onion left, I want to have that in reserve in case I need it for another dish. And the other thing is that I'm trying to go no waste. So I used as many of the things that I had in the fridge as I could to flavor this broth. And let me point out too that I did not add any salt to this broth. There was salt in the meat when I cooked it originally. And when I make whatever I want to make with the broth, I'll be adding seasoning to that dish. So there's no salt added to the broth. So I'll just go ahead and skim as much of this off as I can. And then I'll turn it down to simmer and let it simmer for about the next 6 hours. Okay, so it's been simmering for the last 6 hours. Now it's time to get it strained. I didn't realize how many meat and vegetable scraps I had in there until I started trying to strain them out. Then I took a flour sack towel that I had cut up and layered it over my colander, and then poured the broth into it to strain out the smaller particles. You can see I had lots of scraps. Now that was just to show you a lot of the debris that can get caught in the flour sack towel. I'm going to strain this pot again because I want to get as much of the debris out of it as possible. And And it's still a little cloudy right now, so once I get it strained through again, I'm going to sit it in the fridge overnight so that the fat that's in it can rise to the top. And then I will skim that off, and then I'll heat it up again and decant it. So I've got about 6 cups right there. And this chicken broth smells amazing. Actually, it's making me think of Thanksgiving. It smells like Thanksgiving. Okay, so I've got this pot full of chicken broth. I'll bring you in closer so you can see that. I'm going to set it in the fridge and let it sit and chill so that the fat can rise to the top. Once that does that, I'll scrape it off and then I'll put it in the jars. Well, I'll reheat it and then I'll put it in the jars and I'll let you see the finished product. Well, that's a pretty good amount right there. So I'm going to cover this, put it in the fridge, clean up my mess, and I'll see you a little later. See you later. Well, it's the next morning and I got this pot of chicken bone broth out of the fridge, and I can see where the fat has been congealed on the top. So now I'm going to take this spatula and just scrape the fat off the top. And it has congealed nicely. It is very gelatinous. You can see how gelatinous it is because it keeps jiggling. This did cook down quite a bit. And I think of the methods that I use to make bone broth. The Instant Pot, the slow cooker, and then on top of the stove. I like the slow cooker best. I feel like I get more yield with the slow cooker. And I don't have to mess with it as much. Once it's in there, it's in there. And this fat that I am getting off the top of this can be used to cook with. If you needed some fat in a recipe or you needed to maybe saute a few veggies, this just might work. Now I got quite a bit of the fat off the top. It's not all gone, but quite a bit of it is. Look at this. That's about 4 ounces of fat. Now there is some broth in there with that because of course as I'm scraping the top I will get some of it, but that's the best I can do. So now I'm going to put this back on the stove, heat it up, and then I'll get it into my jars. So you can see why I wanted to pour it into another pot. There's just a little bit of debris that's left at the bottom of that pot, and this way I get rid of that as well. So now let's get this on the stove. While I'm waiting for that to heat up, let me just invite you to take a look at my how to make bone broth in the Instant Pot and how to make bone broth in the slow cooker. I think you will enjoy both of those, and then you can decide which way you want to try to make bone broth. And then also, my friend Mary at Mary's Nest is the bone broth queen. She has videos on how to make chicken bone broth, turkey bone broth, fish bone broth, all kinds of bone broth. You name it, she can show you how to make it. I will link her channel below so that you can check her out as well. And my question for you is, what do you do with your leftover bones? Are you pitching them like I used to do? Or are you trying to move to a no-waste kitchen where you're beginning to use up some of those scraps and make some broth and different things like that for almost no money, because most of the veggies that went into this particular bone broth were scraps that I had saved, and then the bones, of course, were scraps that I had saved, and then the fresh vegetables that went in there were less than stellar. So it was really very inexpensive to make. Let me just show you that it did gel nicely. Let me grab a spoon. I forgot to show you that. Well, I did let you see it in the pan, but let me just show you on the spoon. Look at that. It gelled very nicely. And it's got a very nice taste. And has the tad of sweetness from all the carrot and then the lemon and orange peel. So I'll get this pan washed up while I'm waiting for that to heat up. The jars that I'm using are these wide mouth ball canning jars. I've had real good luck with these in freezing my bone broth, because that's what I'm going to do with it. I'm going to put it in the freezer. If you don't freeze it, you can keep it in your fridge for about a week or so. You want to leave that fat layer on the top if you put it in your fridge, because that layer of fat on the top kind of just helps to preserve it, and then you would just need to scrape that off and you got ready to use it. I'm going to put mine in the freezer because I don't use it up quickly enough that I can leave it in the fridge. These are the lids that I use on that, and they're just like a little plastic lids. They're similar to the lids you get on peanut butter jars, but they're not. But they come from ball, and they just screw right on. And if you get too much broth in there and it freezes and then it pops up, it can kind of push the lid off just a little bit. But I try not to fill it past this mark here, so that when it does expand, as things when you freeze them do, I've still got plenty of head space here for the cat. I might order some of those nifty little jars like Mary has, but I have not done that yet. These are what I use, and they've been working just fine. But she does suggest another jar that she has had real good luck with. Well, I've got the broth heated up, and it looks amazing. It has got beautiful color. I can't wait for you to see that. And I'll just decant it here in the jar and try not to spill it. Look at that great color. And it tastes pretty darn good. I took a sip of it while it was warm. I'll do it again for your benefit, but I've got all this chicken broth that I made pretty much from scraps. So as my friend Mary says, for just pennies on the dollar. So it looks like I'm going to have 6 jars to put in the freezer, and then I'll put one of the jars in the fridge that I can use from. Look at all these beautiful jars of chicken broth that I have. I have 6 pints and then almost a quart jar full here. So I'll taste out of this one. It's delicious. It's going to make the best soups, gravies, and various sauces, whatever it is that I need chicken broth in. And one thing that I plan to try is replacing the water in rice with chicken broth and seeing how that tastes. That's supposed to be pretty good as well. So this one is going to go in the fridge. And then these are going to go in the freezer. I'll let them cool a bit before I pop them in there. Oh, and let me also show you that since I do have chicken broth and fish broth and other broths in the freezer, I just put a piece of Scotch tape on the jar and just marked it chicken bone broth. Otherwise, if the colors are similar, you could have several jars of broth in there and think, which one is this? And I certainly don't want to end up putting my fish broth in something that I need chicken broth for. So there's that. So when I talk about being a traditional homemaker in an untraditional world, one of the things that traditional homemakers used to do way back in the day was they had to make a lot of their own foods, including things like chicken broths and fish broths and bone broths and those kinds of things. They pretty much were a no-waste kitchen. And I am trying to move toward a no-waste kitchen. Now, am I going to make everything that I fix in this kitchen? No. I am learning to bake bread every now and then, but I'm not going to be baking bread on a daily basis or anything like that. But I am trying to move toward more traditional homemaking where I have less processed and prepared foods in my home. So we'll see how that works out. If you have any questions about this whole chicken bone broth process, leave them in the comment section below and I'll get right back to you. And one of the things that this quarantine cooking at home with me has taught me is to use what you can to try to transition more to a no-waste kitchen. So as I make this slow transition to a no-waste kitchen, I'll continue to make other things from my food scraps. For example, I do have some videos where I made fruit scrap vinegars, so I think you might enjoy taking a peek at those. So I will link them above with an iCard as well as in the description box below. And let me take this opportunity to invite you to check out the playlist for this week's episode of Quarantine Cooking at Home with Me. There are so many wonderful, wonderful recipes, different videos that the ladies of the Sister Circle have made to show you what's going on in their quarantine kitchens at home with me. And just so you know, I've raised 3 children and I've managed a home for more than 45 years. So if you want to learn more about the art and science of homemaking, subscribe. I can teach you to be a traditional homemaker in an untraditional world. In the meantime, this is Denise Jordan saying, you are not done yet. Click on the link in the comment section below to check out this week's episode of Quarantine Cooking at Home with Me. I will see you next time.